Over the past 5 or so years, I personally have purchased thousands and thousands of shares of the QYLD ETF, and as you can see right here in one of my long-term portfolios, you can see even all the way back in 2022, I was buying 10 shares of QYLD on a daily basis sometimes, upwards of 49 shares of QYLD, and honestly I was averaging down buying as many shares as I could while the ETF was cheap, because especially at this point in my investing career, I was chasing high yield, and honestly, I wanted dividend income badly. Now in this video, we're going to dig deep into QYLD, what this ETF is and how it works. Then later on in the video, I'm going to share with you exactly how many shares of QYLD I have as of right now, and more importantly, how much in dividends I get paid every single month from holding on to these thousands and thousands of shares. So if you consider yourself a dividend investor and or hold on to any shares of QYLD, make sure to stick around, drop a like down below, and let's get right into it. I just finished my brand new dividend investing ebook where I share exactly how I went from zero to now over 7 figures invested, and also on how I earned more than $6,000 per month in dividends. I also finished my custom dividend tracker that you can use to track your dividend income progress on an ongoing basis. So make sure to grab yourself a copy of my dividend investing ebook and the new dividend tracker today. It's the first link in my description. So first off, what is QYLD for those that might be a little bit confused? We're talking about this right here, the Global X NASDAQ 100 Covered Call ETF. This ETF was extremely popular when I first started dividend investing around 7 or so years ago. Now, reasons to consider QYLD, it says it right here, plain and simple on the website: high income potential, monthly distributions, and efficient option execution. On top of this, I would also add, just as a side note, it's very tax efficient, meaning that QYLD pays most of their dividends in the form of return of capital, which basically kicks the can down the road when it comes to taxes. Now, to dig into high income potential, QYLD seeks to generate income through covered call writing, which historically produces higher yields in periods of volatility. So I personally write covered calls on lots of the portion of my portfolio, and I do that all on my own, but in general, I'm a huge fan of writing covered calls. And when it comes to options, don't get this confused with buying options. In this case, we're talking about writing covered calls, selling the options, being the casino, not the gambler. Now also monthly distributions. This ETF QYLD has paid monthly distributions for 10 years ongoing. And lastly, efficient option execution. QYLD writes call options on the NASDAQ 100 index, saving investors the time and potential expenses of doing so individually. Now, one of the main reasons, like I said, the fact that I bought so many shares of QYLD over the past several years was obviously because of dividends. I didn't buy QYLD to get rich off of the actual price return. And good thing I didn't, because QYLD has not gotten anyone rich off the price return, at least up until now, considering the price return is negative. QYLD back around 10 or so years ago was trading upwards of $25+ per share, now in the high 17s, and this is after a decent recovery over the last year. QYLD is up 8%, which it has had a nice run over the last 365 days to be fair, but this is after a long, gruesome, slow and steady decay that we've seen historically. Now, as a shareholder of QYLD, does this make me worry? It definitely does, of course. A lot of different covered call ETFs had this same thing in common. They seem to decay over time, even if they pay a high dividend, even if they distribute a lot of income to investors. Over time, the decay can be pretty horrible. Now, that being said, the fact that QYLD has paid upwards of 10, 11, 12% per year in dividends along the timeline has definitely made up at least some of the losses, but again, it's something to be wary of. Now, because of this decay, this is one of the main reasons why in 2022, like I showed you guys, I was buying tons of shares because at one point, my average cost on all my shares was much higher than it is currently. But to look a little bit deeper into the actual ETF, of course, it pays a dividend monthly, which I'm going to show you all the dividends here in a second. The expense ratio is pretty pricey at 0.61%. This ETF is actively managed, so it is going to cost you a pretty penny, although I've so far found it sort of worth it. Now, as far as dividends go, QYLD does still have a monster trailing 12-month dividend yield of 11.51%. And if you compare QYLD's dividend yield trailing 12-month to something like JETB or even JETQ, for those more income-focused investors out there, you know what I'm talking about, QYLD's dividend still is massive compared to the others. And although most of the time, these sort of option style, covered call style ETFs never pay the same exact dividend every single month, because it depends on what happens within that time frame on whether or not the dividend is going to be small, medium, or large, basically. At times, this ETF has paid 10 cents on a monthly basis. And then at times, there's been massive dividends, including special dividends, upward of 50 cents to investors. But all in all, QYLD, at least since I've owned it, has paid anywhere from around 20 cents to, as of recently the last year or so, around 17 or 18 cents, which still, generally speaking, even if the ETF just trades sideways, I'm fine with earning a tax efficient 10% yield all day. Now, a side note here, this ETF is not necessarily going to have any dividend growth whatsoever, and this is important for those investors out there that are trying to build long-term portfolios with a basket of assets that are going to pay more and more over time, because realistically, even thinking about inflation, investors, including myself, always want to earn more and more over time, which QYLD is definitely not showing any of that. Next, this is definitely helpful to get an idea of how this ETF has performed long term, and if an investor would have invested $10,000 into QYLD when this ETF started way back in the day, even when it was much more expensive at $25 per share, and then reinvested the dividends along the way, this investor would have turned that $10,000 into just $20,000. And this is over 10.24 years during a time historically where the market has made a lot more money in a lot of other areas. But to be fair, 7% average annual total return. I've seen better, but I've also seen worse. Not all that horrible, but still nothing really to jump around about. Now, lastly, if you're still watching this video, thank you so much. Make sure to drop a like on it. But now you want to see how many shares of this ETF I currently own across my 7-figure dividend growth portfolio and how much I earn in dividends per month. So currently I own, as of right now, somewhere of around 2,729 shares of QYLD, which I think I spent probably nearly $60,000 on. Now, I didn't purchase all these shares at one time. I showed you a just quick snapshot at the beginning of the video that in 2022, I was buying QYLD heavily, and this was to average down, which now my average cost per share is somewhere around $19 or $20 per share. And again, it's trading currently around 18. So I'm certainly still not up as far as price return goes. But of course, over the years, I've earned massive dividends, which I've invested into different things, including but not limited things like realty income, even JEPI, things like JEPQ, SCHD, etc. Now, as far as figuring out how much I earn from QYLD alone on a monthly basis, this is going to change because, of course, QYLD might pay 15 cents on a month, they might pay 19, 20 cents on a month, but on average, it's going off of an 11% yield on cost, which is lower than the current dividend, of course. I'm earning on average around $490 on a monthly basis, which again is relatively tax efficient just because QYLD does offer a lot of return of capital, so you don't pay taxes on it until you sell it or until your cost basis hits zero. Now, QYLD is by no means an ETF that I would ever want to make up the majority of my portfolio. As you can see in my portfolio, for example, I own things like 1,000 shares of Apple, I own things like Devo, I own things like BDJ. I have a wide range of different stocks and ETFs across my portfolio, and I'm slowly trying to make this portfolio better and better by the day. But for the investor out there that does want a somewhat reliable ETF that does offer tax efficiency potentially, does offer pretty consistent monthly dividends, but also a big warning, has the potential and has the likelihood to keep decaying somewhat. QYLD, or the global NASDAQ 100 covered call ETF, is definitely worth looking into. But last but not least, now I want to hear from you guys down below. In the talks of QYLD, the global X NASDAQ 100 covered call ETF, the ETF that I've been buying for years now, do you currently own any shares of this one in your portfolio? And if so, how many shares do you have as of right now? If you enjoyed this video, make sure to please drop a like on it and subscribe for more future content like this. Thanks as always for stopping by, and if you are interested in investing, make sure to check out these recent videos I posted right here.